I never imagined that a simple weekend at my aunt's house would unravel the parts of me I had kept hidden even from myself. The first moment I stepped inside, the air felt different, thick, expectant, like the house itself was holding its breath. Aunt Miranda's eyes met mine with a gaze so sharp, so precise, that I felt it slicing through my carefully constructed layers of comfort. She smiled, but it wasn't warm. It was a knowing smile, like she could see everything I hadn't yet admitted to myself. I froze, unsure whether I was nervous, excited, or terrified, or some unsettling combination of all three. "You've grown so much," she said softly, guiding me toward the living room. But her words weren't casual. There was a strange intensity in them, a weight that pressed on my chest. She had always been a strong, unyielding presence in my life, and yet this time, she seemed almost magnetic, commanding attention in a way that made me unsteady. Before I realized it, I was sitting across from her, watching as she arranged objects on the coffee table, chains, delicate ribbons, and what looked like a structured bustier, glinting subtly under the sunlight. My stomach twisted. I wanted to look away, but my gaze was glued to her hands, to the strange ritualistic care she poured into each motion. She noticed, of course. She always noticed. "I think it's time we explored the side of you you've kept hidden," she said quietly, almost a whisper. Her words felt like a key turning in a lock somewhere deep inside me, unlocking desires and fears I hadn't yet dared to name. I shook my head, a mix of protest and anticipation tangled together. I don't know if I." "You will," she interrupted gently but firmly. "It's part of you already. You just need to see it." And then, before I could argue, she guided me into the bedroom, where mirrors covered the walls, reflecting my own uncertainty back at me. The chains were there, arranged neatly, almost ceremoniously, and the bustier lay folded on the bed like an invitation and a challenge all at once. I swallowed hard, my pulse echoing in my ears. The transformation wasn't just physical, it was psychological. Each ribbon she tied, each chain she fastened, felt like a thread weaving me into a new identity, one I had always sensed but never embraced. I struggled with the mirror, with my reflection, as it slowly morphed from familiar to foreign. My own face seemed to soften, my posture shifting subtly, a hesitant elegance creeping into my movements. I caught sight of myself in the mirror and felt a thrill I couldn't name, a dangerous, exhilarating sense of recognition. Aunt Miranda watched me, her eyes never leaving mine, her hands steady, guiding, correcting. Every movement I made was observed, and yet I didn't feel exposed. I felt seen. For the first time, perhaps, truly seen. And the chains, surprisingly, didn't feel confining. They were a strange reassurance, a physical reminder that I was exactly where I was supposed to be, that the awkward tension, the fear, the vulnerability, it was all part of this slow, deliberate unfolding. By the time the bustier was secured and I stood fully transformed, I barely recognized myself. My reflection was not the boy who had entered this house hours ago, unsure and guarded. This reflection was daring, delicate, strong, and, in a way that terrified me, undeniably me. Aunt Miranda stepped back, her smile satisfied, and for the first time, I met her gaze without fear, only an echo of wonder at what had just begun. The mirror reflected a version of me that felt both alien and familiar, and I couldn't stop staring. My fingers traced the smooth curve of the bustier, the delicate tension of the chains, the subtle reshaping of my posture. It was as though the air itself had shifted, charged with a quiet electricity, and every breath I took seemed to echo with possibility. I had always known there was a part of me that existed behind closed doors, a part that whispered in moments of solitude, a part one barely admitted even to myself. But here, in Aunt Miranda's house, it was no longer a whisper. It demanded attention, demanded acknowledgement. She moved behind me, her hands guiding mine to adjust the straps, the delicate lace catching slightly on my skin. I shivered, not from cold, but from the intensity of her presence. "Relax," she said softly, her voice a gentle anchor in the storm of my emotions. This isn't about losing yourself. It's about finding what's already there. I wanted to argue, to claim control, but every time I opened my mouth, my words felt small, insignificant, inadequate. Instead, I let her guide me, felt the subtle shifts in my body as I mirrored her instructions, and discovered a rhythm I didn't know I could possess. The chains, heavy yet precise, seemed to trace invisible lines of restraint and liberation at once. I could feel the boundaries pressing gently against my skin, and yet the sensation didn't frighten me. It made me acutely aware of my own body, of the new shapes and angles that were slowly emerging. Then came the corset tightening. Each pull of the laces constricted my torso, forcing my chest forward, my shoulders back. Pain mingled with exhilaration. I gasped the first time she cinched it fully, the pressure sharp but oddly comforting, as if the corset itself had the power to hold the chaos of my thoughts together. My heartbeat thundered, a mix of fear, excitement, and awe. I looked at Aunt Miranda, searching her face for any hint of judgment, and found only quiet certainty, a calm authority that made me want to surrender completely. "You're doing beautifully," she said, almost like a mantra, and I repeated it in my head like a lifeline. Beautiful. A word I rarely applied to myself, yet here it felt undeniably true. I turned slightly, testing my reflection, and saw a stranger who was slowly becoming me. The awkwardness of my hands, the hesitancy in my stance, they melted away under her gaze, replaced by a tentative elegance I hadn't dared to imagine. But with each step of the transformation, the emotional storm inside me grew more intense. A part of me panicked. Who was I becoming? Would anyone recognize me outside these walls? Was I losing a part of myself in this process? Or was this, finally, the part one had been hiding all along? These questions tore at me as Aunt Miranda guided me through subtle movements, teaching me to balance, to sway, to inhabit the form I now occupied. Then she brought out the heels. I froze. My body, already feeling stretched and foreign, tensed at the sight of them. "You can do it," she said softly, placing one foot in a shoe. My hands shook as I followed her lead, and the first step was wobbly, uncertain, almost comical, yet liberating in a way that startled me. She steadied me, adjusting my posture, whispering encouragement. With each step, my body began to memorize a new rhythm, a new cadence that was at once unnatural and perfectly mine. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time seemed to dissolve, and the room became a private universe, a place where the only measure of reality was the reflection staring back at me. I began to feel an unexpected intimacy with myself, a connection I had never dared to explore. I laughed softly at the absurdity of my own hesitation, the self-doubt that had once seemed so immovable, and felt a spark of joy that was both terrifying and exhilarating. Aunt Miranda's eyes never left me. "You're more than you think," she said finally, almost reverently. Her words settled in my chest, a gentle, insistent truth I couldn't deny. And yet, the tension inside me remained, a mix of fear, excitement, and curiosity. I was discovering a side of myself that had always been there, hidden in plain sight, and the realization was both beautiful and overwhelming. As night fell and the room dimmed, the mirror reflected a complete transformation. The chains, the bustier, the heels, they were more than garments. They were a revelation, a bridge between who I was and who I could be. I caught my own eye in the mirror, and for the first time, I saw not a boy playing at someone else's identity, but a person embracing themselves fully, precariously, and yet entirely. The emotional tide inside me surged, a mix of fear, exhilaration, and awe. My aunt watched silently, as if guarding a secret I had only just begun to understand. And in that moment, standing fully transformed, I realized something profound. The person staring back at me was not a disguise, not a fleeting experiment, but the truest version of me, forged in chains, guided by patience, and revealed in layers of courage I had never known I possessed. I didn't want the night to end. The quiet of the house, the dim light spilling over the walls, the soft creak of floorboards beneath me, It all felt like a sanctuary. Yet, beneath the calm, a storm raged. I kept touching my reflection, tracing the subtle curves of my waist, the gentle line of my collarbones, the way the Bustier molded me into a shape I'd never dared to imagine. Each touch was electric, sending shivers up my spine. And with it came a swirl of questions I couldn't escape. Who am I now? Who have I always been? Waiting beneath the surface. Aunt Miranda stepped closer, her presence grounding me even as my mind tumbled in 100 directions. "It's okay to feel everything at once," she whispered. "Fear, excitement, wonder, they're all part of discovering who you truly are." Her hands brushed mine, adjusting a chain here, a strap there, and each movement was deliberate, intimate, filled with an attention I had never experienced before. The chains, once heavy and intimidating, now felt like extensions of me, as if the steel itself had a pulse, a rhythm synced with mine. I sank slowly onto the edge of the bed, my heels clicking softly against the floor. My chest rose and fell with each breath, heart hammering, mind spinning. I wanted to run, to escape the intensity of what was happening, but a deeper part of me refused. It demanded that I stay, that I face myself fully, without shame or pretense. And so I stayed, trembling, raw, utterly exposed, yet curiously alive in a way I had never known. "Look at yourself," Aunt Miranda said gently, guiding me toward the mirror. "Not as someone else, not as the person you think you should be, but as the person who has always been inside you." I obeyed, hesitant at first, then with growing courage. My eyes traced every line, every detail of the reflection. My shoulders were straighter, my stance more poised, and the chains and bustier framed me with a new elegance. But it wasn't just the physical change that stunned me, it was the internal shift. I could feel the old versions of myself dissolving, the self-doubt and fear loosening like fragile threads, leaving a core of something vibrant, authentic, and undeniably real. And then came a moment that shook me to the core. Aunt Miranda gently lifted my chin, forcing me to meet my own gaze in the mirror. "Do you see her?" she asked. Her voice was soft, but it carried an unshakable certainty. I blinked, startled. "Her?" I whispered. "Yes," she said, a small, knowing smile tugging at her lips. "The person you were afraid to meet. She's been here all along." I couldn't speak. My throat tightened. I swallowed hard, fighting the lump of emotion threatening to spill over. And yet, for the first time, I understood. It wasn't about losing myself. It was about meeting someone I had longed for without even knowing it. The reflection staring back at me wasn't a stranger. It was a truth I had denied for too long. Hours passed in silence. We moved slowly, carefully, as if each gesture were sacred. Aunt Miranda adjusted a chain here, brushed a strand of hair there, and I began to notice the subtle elegance in the way I could carry myself. I experimented tentatively, shifting my weight, allowing my hips to sway slightly, letting my hands move with newfound grace. Each motion felt like an exploration, a discovery of a language my body had always known but I had never dared to speak. Then came the most unexpected revelation: laughter. A small, incredulous laugh escaped me as I wobbled slightly on the heels, almost toppling over, yet catching myself with a grace that surprised me. Aunt Miranda's eyes sparkled with amusement and pride. "Exactly," she said. "There's joy in this. There's freedom. Let it in." I laughed again, louder this time, the sound unfamiliar yet intoxicating. The fear, the hesitation, the doubts, they were still there, lingering at the edges, but they were softened now, almost irrelevant in the face of the wonder and thrill coursing through me. I felt light, unbound, and for the first time, completely myself. Yet, as exhilarating as it was, a quiet tension lingered beneath it all. What would happen when I left this room, this house, this cocoon? Could the world outside see me as I saw myself now? Or would I have to hide again, retreating into shadows where my identity could exist only in secrecy? The questions twisted inside me, sharp and persistent, but I refused to let them dominate. I had crossed a threshold, discovered a side of me that would not be denied, and no external judgment could erase the truth I had embraced tonight. Aunt Miranda placed her hand gently on my shoulder. "You're stronger than you think, braver than you realize, and more beautiful than you can imagine." I closed my eyes, letting the words sink in. I felt a strange, quiet pride swelling inside me, mingling with the lingering shiver of fear and exhilaration. And in that moment, I understood that this journey was only beginning. The chains, the bustier, the carefully guided steps, they were tools, symbols, but the real transformation was deeper, invisible, indelible. It was in the acceptance of myself, in the courage to face what I had long hidden, in the willingness to step fully into the life I had always imagined, even if it was terrifying. By the time I finally sank back onto the bed, exhausted but electrified, I felt a profound serenity I had never known. The reflection in the mirror was no longer just an image, it was a promise. A promise that the person I had discovered tonight was not fleeting, not fragile, not a fantasy. She was real. She was me. And for the first time, I was ready to face everything the world might throw at her, armed with the knowledge that this identity, this self, could never be taken from me. Morning came in soft, golden light that spilled through the curtains, and I woke with the strange sensation of still being both myself and someone entirely new. The chains were gone, the bustier carefully hung back on a hanger, and yet the transformation lingered. Not in my clothes, but in my posture, in the way my body felt, in the quiet confidence threading through my veins. I lay there for a long moment, listening to the subtle creak of the house, the distant hum of traffic outside, and the rhythm of my own heartbeat, which now felt deeper, more deliberate. I was awake in a world that suddenly seemed different, sharper, richer, somehow more dangerous and more exciting at the same time. Aunt Miranda appeared at the doorway, holding 2 mugs of tea, and her smile was both calm and knowing. "How do you feel?" she asked softly. I hesitated, trying to articulate feelings that were too fluid, too raw. Different," I said finally. "Like I'm finally seeing myself." She nodded, as if she had expected no other answer. "Good. But seeing is one thing. Living it is another. And living it can be challenging." I felt a flicker of panic. Challenges. What kind of challenges? Social, internal, or both? The thought of stepping outside her house, back into my usual life, made my chest tighten. I had never felt more exposed, more vulnerable, yet paradoxically, never more alive. That morning, as I walked to the window and watched the world outside, I realized that my identity was no longer hidden. Every movement, every gesture I made carried the weight of what I had become. Even brushing my hair felt like a declaration, every twist of my wrists, every tilt of my head, a quiet claim of ownership over this version of myself. I wanted to run from it, to hide, yet part of me burned to step forward and see how it felt to exist fully in this form. Aunt Miranda stayed beside me, silent for a long moment, and then said, "The hardest part isn't the change itself. It's the world's reaction. You've faced yourself, but now the world will test you." Her words were chilling, but they also sparked determination. I realized that this wasn't just about what I looked like, it was about how I carried myself, how I felt internally, how I let others perceive the version of me that had always existed, quietly waiting. The thought of encountering friends, neighbors, or even family in this form filled me with both dread and a strange thrill. That day, we began what Aunt Miranda called practical training. The exercises were subtle: how to walk without hesitation, how to let my shoulders relax, how to carry my weight in a way that felt natural yet unmistakably feminine. Every misstep, every stumble, was corrected with patience and care. I was learning more than movement. I was learning the language of a self I had long denied. At one point, I caught my reflection in a hallway mirror and paused, breath catching. There she was, the same person from last night, yet more grounded, more real. Her eyes were steady now, her expression confident, and her body moved with a quiet elegance that almost surprised me. But the doubts remained. Could I sustain this outside these walls? Could I maintain the courage I felt when Aunt Miranda was guiding me, when I was under her watchful eyes? That evening, she took me to a quiet park, a space where strangers moved past without noticing us, where I could experiment in small doses. Every step was an exercise in courage. I practiced smiles, gestures, the subtle sway of my hips. I felt the wind against my face and realized that the world was larger than my fears, but my fears were real, persistent, whispering that perhaps I wasn't ready. And yet, as I moved through that park, I discovered an unexpected truth. People did not see me the way I feared. They glanced, nodded, continued walking. The weight of self-consciousness was mine alone to bear. I could feel it loosening, thread by thread, with every step. My reflection in shop windows became an ally rather than a tormentor. Each moment of recognition, each subtle affirmation from my own reflection, strengthened the fragile, precious sense of self I had begun to claim. Back at Aunt Miranda's house that night, exhaustion mingled with exhilaration. I collapsed onto the bed, my body trembling with a cocktail of fatigue and adrenaline. "You did well today," she said softly, brushing a strand of hair from my face. Her hands, warm and steady, felt like a tether to reality, a reassurance that I was not alone in this journey. "I don't know if I can keep this up," I admitted, voice barely audible. "You can," she said simply, "because it's not about keeping up. It's about living honestly. Fear will come, doubt will come, but you've seen who you are. That truth is stronger than anything outside this room." And in that moment, I realized she was right. The real transformation wasn't in the bustier, the chains, or even the heels. It was in the reclamation of myself, in the courage to face what I had denied, in the willingness to live openly, even if it scared me. I closed my eyes, letting the quiet confidence settle in. For the first time, I felt the fragile, exhilarating, terrifying sense of self I had always sought. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't simple. But it was mine. And the world, I realized, would have to adjust to me. The following days at Aunt Miranda's house felt like stepping into a world suspended between two realities, one familiar, safe, and structured, the other unfamiliar, thrilling, and raw. Every morning, I woke to the weight of expectation, not just from her, but from myself. The reflection in the mirror greeted me with quiet insistence, reminding me that I was no longer the boy who had arrived timid, unsure, and hesitant. Yet at the same time, doubt gnawed at the edges of my confidence, whispering that the world outside would never accept this version of me. We began a new routine, not just practice, not just refinement, but preparation. Aunt Miranda introduced elements of social interaction, teaching me subtle gestures, the nuances of posture, and the ways a presence could speak before words ever left the lips. She was meticulous, patient, yet firm, demanding that I confront the smallest insecurities. I learned to adjust my gaze, to carry my hands without tension, to move in a way that balanced grace and strength. But the true test came unexpectedly. Aunt Miranda arranged a small gathering of friends and distant relatives, people who knew me, but had never seen this version of me. My stomach twisted at the thought, every nerve screaming with anticipation and fear. "It's important," she told me gently, "that you face this. Not to prove anything to them, but to prove it to yourself." The day arrived, and I felt like I was walking through a storm. Each step toward the living room was measured, deliberate. My heels clicked softly against the floor, a rhythm that somehow grounded me. The familiar faces greeted me with warmth, yet I could feel their surprise, the subtle shift in their eyes. My heart raced, but I forced myself to meet their gazes steadily, recalling Aunt Miranda's lessons: breathe, posture, presence. At first, the tension was almost unbearable. I could sense the internal judgments, the unspoken questions in their expressions. But slowly, something remarkable happened. With each word I spoke, each movement I made, I felt the layers of fear peeling away. Laughter came easier, gestures felt natural, and the reflection of my own courage began to ripple outward, touching even those who had been skeptical. Aunt Miranda watched quietly from the corner, her eyes soft but piercing. "See?" she whispered when I passed her a drink with confidence. "It's not about changing anyone else. It's about living fully. They will adjust or they won't. That's not your burden." By the end of the evening, I realized the truth of her words. Some eyes lingered with curiosity, some with confusion, but none with malice. And in that, I found an unexpected liberation. I had imagined confrontation, rejection, and judgment, yet what I discovered was resilience, the ability to inhabit my truth regardless of external opinion. Later, alone in the quiet of my aunt's bedroom, I stared at the mirror once more. The chains and bustier were gone, replaced by simple, elegant clothing, yet the transformation felt more profound than any garment could convey. I touched my reflection, feeling the solidity of my own presence for the first time. The curves, the lines, the gentle sway of my posture, it was no longer an experiment. It was life, real and unflinching. But even in triumph, the inner struggle remained. I wrestled with the duality of my existence, the tension between the comfort of my former self and the exhilaration of this newfound identity. At times, I felt like a stranger inhabiting my own body. At others, I felt at home for the first time ever. Aunt Miranda's voice echoed in my mind, steady and patient. "The journey is not linear. Embrace every moment, even the uncertainty." One evening, she introduced a new challenge, a long walk through the nearby town. "It's time to test the world," she said simply. The thought of being seen, recognized, even possibly judged, tightened a coil of fear in my chest. But I understood that growth demanded courage, and courage demanded exposure. We stepped into the streets, and every step was deliberate. I felt eyes glance my way, some curious, some indifferent. Each movement was an assertion, each smile a declaration. The wind brushed against my face, the subtle rhythm of my steps grounding me. And with every passing block, I felt an extraordinary sense of freedom, the liberation that comes not from approval, but from self-acceptance. By the time we returned home, I was exhausted, yet exhilarated. The mirror greeted me once more, and I smiled, a full, genuine smile that reached my eyes. I realized that the real transformation had nothing to do with chains, bustiers, or guidance. It was internal, a reclamation of myself, a surrender to authenticity, and a fierce embrace of vulnerability. That night, alone, I reflected on the journey so far. The fear, the exhilaration, the guidance, the mistakes, the laughter, the moments of sheer terror, and the victories both small and profound. I understood finally that this identity was not fragile. It had been there all along, waiting for acknowledgement, courage, and care. Aunt Miranda had not created it, she had only helped me recognize it. And in that quiet reflection, I made a promise to myself. I would live fully in this truth, no matter how uncertain the world might be. Every step, every movement, every glance in the mirror would be a reminder that I was no longer hiding. I had faced myself, confronted my fears, and embraced an identity that was undeniably, irrevocably mine. I knew challenges would come, moments of doubt, external scrutiny, inner questioning, but I had discovered a resilience that could withstand it all. The chains had been a symbol, the bustier a catalyst, but the true transformation was deeper, indelible, and eternal. I was no longer the boy who had arrived timid and uncertain. I was her, confident, graceful, authentic, and wholly alive. The days that followed felt like a delicate balance between exhilaration and introspection. Each morning, I woke to the quiet hum of Aunt Miranda's house, sunlight spilling over the walls, and I would catch my reflection in the mirror before even opening my eyes. She was there, graceful, confident, undeniably me, and yet, at first, I still hesitated, as if I could slip back into the boy I had been before. But each day, that hesitation grew shorter, the reflections pulled stronger, until the old self became a shadow fading at the edges of my vision. Aunt Miranda's guidance remained steady, but now it was less instruction and more affirmation. She allowed me space to experiment, to explore subtle gestures and expressions that felt uniquely my own. She never pressured me. She simply reminded me that self-discovery was a journey, not a performance. Yet within that gentle guidance, there was always an unspoken challenge: to step fully into my own courage, to trust that the world could handle the person I had become. One afternoon, she suggested we revisit the town, a longer walk this time, through busier streets and public spaces. My chest tightened at the thought. The fear of judgment had not disappeared. It had shifted, become sharper, more insistent. But I nodded, understanding that true growth demanded exposure. I wanted to see how far I could go, how much of myself I could claim openly. As we stepped onto the crowded sidewalks, every glance from strangers was like a mirror, reflecting pieces of myself I had been hesitant to acknowledge. Some eyes lingered, curious but non-judgmental. Others passed quickly, indifferent. And yet the most significant gaze was my own. Each movement, each tilt of my head, each sway of my hips, reinforced a truth I could no longer deny. I was present, whole, and unashamed. Aunt Miranda stayed close, silent but supportive, her presence a calm anchor amid the unpredictability of the outside world. "You are not defined by others' perceptions," she reminded me quietly. "You are defined by the truth you claim for yourself." By the time we returned home, I was exhausted but alive in a way I had never known. The mirror awaited me, as it always did, but now I approached it with reverence rather than trepidation. I studied every detail: the confident set of my shoulders, the gentle curve of my waist, the elegance in my hands and posture. She was there, fully, completely, undeniably. And I no longer feared her presence. I welcomed it, embraced it, celebrated it. That night, alone in my room, I reflected on the journey. The first hesitant steps in the Bustier and chains, the small victories in the private practice of mirrors and guidance, the trials of stepping into the wider world, and the relentless questioning of my own courage. Every fear, every moment of doubt, had been part of the tapestry that wove me into this person. I realized then that the external symbols, the chains, the structured clothing, the carefully guided movements, had all been tools, catalysts. The real transformation was internal, profound, and irrevocable. I traced my reflection with my fingertips, marveling at how much I had changed, not just in appearance, but in essence. I had discovered a resilience I hadn't known I possessed, a capacity for self-love and self-acceptance that felt like a new kind of freedom. The fear that had once threatened to overwhelm me had not vanished entirely, but it had become manageable, tempered by the certainty that I was no longer hiding. I had claimed a truth that could not be denied. Aunt Miranda entered quietly, sitting beside me on the bed. She didn't speak at first, just let me take in the stillness of the moment. Then she said softly, "You've come so far. Not just in appearance, but in courage, in heart, in honesty. Remember this feeling because it is the foundation for everything you will do from now on." I nodded, tears prickling my eyes, not from sadness, but from an overwhelming sense of relief, pride, and joy. I had stepped into the unknown, faced myself, and emerged whole. For the first time in my life, I felt entirely at home in my own skin. The next morning, I woke with a sense of clarity. The reflection in the mirror smiled back at me, steady and confident. I didn't hesitate, didn't shrink away. I was ready to live fully, openly, authentically. Every step I took, every gesture I made, carried the imprint of the journey I had endured, the courage I had claimed, and the self I had fought to embrace. Walking through the house, I realized that the transformation had not just changed me, it had changed the way I experienced the world. Colors seemed brighter, sounds sharper, moments richer. Every interaction held the potential for discovery, every reflection a reminder of strength. I no longer felt confined by fear, uncertainty, or doubt. I had emerged as someone complete, someone brave, someone who could exist fully in her own truth. And as I paused at the window, looking out at the world with wide, unflinching eyes, I understood something profound. The chains and bustier, the guidance and training, the mirrors and reflections, they had all been part of a journey that revealed one undeniable fact. The person staring back at me was no longer hidden, no longer uncertain, no longer incomplete. She was whole, radiant, unapologetically herself. The story had begun in fear, curiosity, and uncertainty, but it ended in triumph, acceptance, and freedom. Every hesitation, every tremor of doubt, every flicker of fear had been worth it, because they had led me to this moment, to the irrefutable truth that I was not pretending, not playing, not becoming someone else. I had finally become who I was always meant to be. And in that final reflection, smiling fully at the person I had discovered, I whispered quietly, almost reverently, I am me. Fully. Truly. Finally.